So that part of that rationale is so stupid as to be insulting to all of her supporters. It's a foreign country. Why are we paying for their weapon systems?
So recently, Glenn Greenwald had a podcast where he talks about the fact that AOC broke from many of her progressive compatriots and supported a $500 million aid package to Israel. She's effectively voted Israel first. Now, I sense that there's a clear reason for this and a signal that's being sent by her and what it means. Maybe we'll get into that. But first, let's see what Glenn has to say about it. He covers these issues with close to perfection. So let's check it out. And please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
For a long time, it was utterly taboo in the United States to say that. Israel's position is, oh, we don't say if we're a nuclear power. We don't say if we have nuclear weapons. And for some reason, everybody in the United States government feels compelled to go along with that charade when the whole world knows that Israel has a huge nuclear weapons program, the only country in the Middle East to have it for all the obsession on Iran's nuclear program. It's actually Israel. That's the only country in that region that has a nuclear program that they keep secret.
And goes to war with other powers under the auspices that that other country might have a secret nuclear weapons program like Iran. Yeah, Glenn's right.
And that was her point. It wasn't anything, there was nothing antagonistic about Israel. There was no animus toward Israel. It was just, it's a foreign country. Why are we paying for their weapon systems? So if you're giving $500 million for Israel and saying, oh, that's just for their air defense system, that's $500 million that's then freed up for them to buy bomber jets that destroy Gaza or bomb Syria and Lebanon. It's all inextricably linked. You can't separate one from the other. Marjorie Taylor Greene was able to attract one Republican, Thomas Massie, who coincidentally is somebody that Donald Trump is desperate to remove from Congress.
Coincidentally.
And four Democrats, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Al Green, and Summer Lee. So that's a total of 6 votes. 422 were against.
Yeah, think about that. 6 people voted against this $500 million Israel First package that funded what they're saying it's the Iron Dome. But here's the thing, is that that's not a purely defensive measure to arm Israel with defensive capabilities that allows it to invade its neighbors, consummate a genocide in Gaza, etc., with near impunity because then its neighbors are afraid to attack it. This would be like saying, like, well, hey, we funded this country's nuclear weapons program. We're going to open a new nuclear weapons program up for them, but it's all good because it's purely defensive. Well, no, it actually allows that country to get away with things it wouldn't otherwise.
122 to 6. As I've often said, the only time you see bipartisan majorities so overwhelming is when there's something on the floor relating to Israel. It's always like 413 to 3, 419 to 7. The only kind of thing that produces votes like that is Israel.
That's true. There's a bipartisan consensus on aid to Israel, that's for sure. For all the theatrics about how, hey, there's vastly different foreign policy views in our government, there really isn't in terms of Israel. And by the way, props to Massie, who not only has taken a great stance on this, but also has worked to expose AIPAC's influence in Congress. Marjorie Taylor Greene has too recently on Tucker Carlson, so props to them. Marjorie Taylor Greene is clearly more opposed to aid to Israel than AOC, clearly.
Now, one of the people who was not on the list of 6 voting against sending $500 million for Israel's military, and she was in fact a no vote, one of the 422 no votes, was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, queen of the left, queen of the working class.
Oh, yeah.
And she voted to have American workers send $500 million to bolster Israel's military. And here's what she had to say when there was an obvious uproar over the fact that the queen of the left and the queen of the working class voted that way, while Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie and those 4 Democrats didn't. Here's what she said. Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment does nothing to cut off offensive aid to Israel. nor end the flow of U.S. munitions being used in Gaza. Of course, I voted against it. Okay. What she's saying there is that, look, Marjorie Taylor Greene's bill didn't cut off everything. It cut off some stuff, but not everything. And so, of course, I voted against it. How does that make any sense in the world?
Exactly. That part's true, but it wouldn't explain why, if you're opposed to aid to Israel, why you'd vote against it. So, absolutely. It's just one of those things that it doesn't make any sense.
Especially, as I said, because if you don't send them $500 million on those replenishing of their air defense, that's $500 million of their own that they have to spend. They have less than to spend on the stuff AOC pretends she wants to stop.
Right. Like what they're doing in Gaza, slaughtering people in Gaza, building up weaponry for a potential regime change in Iran, which Trump was complicit with, and put on the table there for Iran to take the opportunity to decide whether that would happen. They tipped Trump off instead and didn't wipe Israel off the map. They didn't kill Americans despite the death to America chants that we heard so much about. So yeah, these things that Israel is doing, you know, AOC's pretended to be against them so much, but in this case, she was perfectly willing to fund them militarily.
And the reason Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't try and cut off all that funding is because it's already in law. This was a bill pending that had this money for this specific military program, and that was what she was able to cut off. So that part of that rationale is so stupid as to be insulting to all of her supporters. And I have to say, even the ones who usually are willing to swallow whatever she feeds them did not accept that. It makes no sense. And the way she says it, like, of course I voted against it. It's the most obvious thing in the world. Like, she didn't cut off everything. She just cut off some things. Of course I voted against it. And then this is what she goes on to say, quote, what it does do is cut off defensive Iron Dome capabilities while allowing the actual bombs killing Palestinians to continue. I have long stated that I do not believe that adding to the death count of innocent victims to this war is constructive to its end. That is a simple and clear difference of opinion that has long been established. I remain focused on cutting the flow of U.S. munitions that are being used to perpetuate the genocide in Gaza. Okay, so get this. According to AOC, Israel is currently guilty of the worst crime a country can possibly commit, which is the crime of genocide. The extinguishing of an entire population based on race, ethnicity, or nationality. Israel, she says, is committing genocide in Gaza. For a long time, she didn't say that.
I happen to agree with her, by the way, and if you're a right-winger that can't stand the fact I'm agreeing with her on that part of this, you know, what can I say? That's the truth. And we're far beyond the point of whether or not this is a genocide. There's 60 to 100,000 people dead, being displaced. There's open discussions about how Rafah should be a concentration zone for the Palestinians. Talk of Greater Israel expanding the presence of Israel not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank. And you have like 150,000 people missing. Child are pulled up from the rubble every day. So I agree with that part of it, despite the fact that she's clearly just trying to signal that, hey, I think this too. But yeah, I'm going to still throw funding, military funding, to Israel while they're committing a genocide. Again, Glenn's right. This doesn't make any sense.
She got publicly harassed, and finally she said it, but that's her view. Israel's committing genocide. So imagine saying that. This country, Israel, is committing a genocide against the 2.2 million people in Gaza, or however many are left. And at the same time, I want to pay for the air defense system of the country that's committing the genocide. I want to send the country that's committing the genocide $500 million.
Exactly. That's the whole crux of it. And I'm sorry to even laugh because it's so preposterous. And this whole, policy is so vile of arming Israel while it's committing a genocide. You're going to put that in writing in a tweet, but then still vote for the funding and drag Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment that tries to curtail the constant flow of money to Israel, which, by the way, again, props to her. And props to Democrats like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib for supporting that amendment too, by the way. They have cojones on this issue. You're not one of them, AOC. And I think this signals that she's going to run for president. I think she's setting up her amiability toward the Israel lobby right now because she wants to lay a footprint saying that she's acceptable enough to the regime that she could be nominated by the Democratic Party for president. Because guess who didn't do it that way? Bernie Sanders. He was actually really good on aid to Israel generally. And because of that, they made sure he could not get the nomination. He couldn't wrestle that away from Hillary Clinton. That's what I think we're seeing here.
So that they don't have to pay for their own air defense system and are free to use that money on the weapons that she says she wants to stop. How unbelievably stupid is that? How insultingly twisted is that rationale? You call it a genocide and then justify in the same breath sending that same genocidal country $500 million, not for welfare, not for educational opportunities, not for eliminating racial inequality or whatever, but for their military. It's their military budget. It's the same thing. It's like the U.S. military budget. Doesn't differentiate between defensive and offensive weapons. And when you have the ability to protect yourself, for example, let's say that there are these YouTubers who get very wealthy, and they hire huge bodyguards, theoretically to safeguard them and protect them in case they're attacked. But obviously, that gives them a massive amount of confidence to go around harassing people, and many of them do.
That's exactly right. Glenn's making the perfect point here, because if you are armed with this many defensive capabilities, it increases what foreign policy aficionados call disproportionality, a principle where you have disproportionate means to protect yourself, which arms you with offensive capabilities that you otherwise wouldn't have. And we can see how Israel employs this in the region, exactly, for sure. They've, bombed 6 or 7 countries or invaded 6 or 7 countries in the last few decades, just bombed Iran recently, consummating a genocide in Gaza. And they do this because the U.S. has their back. It bankrolls all of this. We gave them our government, our criminal government, I don't even want to say we because I'm not complicit in this madness, gave them $20 billion last year. And prior to that, it was $4 billion because this was before October 7th, and October 7th meant that that spending had to increase by 5 times, and Trump and most of the Republicans are totally on board with this, by the way. Biden wasn't much different. But this allows Israel to do what it's doing to its neighbors, to, flirt with expanding the West Bank settlements. Not even flirt with it, try to do it. Invade Lebanon a few times, lay claim to parts of Syria, and just harass its neighbors for no reason. And then the U.S. inherits the hatred that causes too. So yes, perfect point by Glenn here.
Knowing that they have these bodyguards right there to defend them in case anything happens back. So if you build Israel an Iron Dome and say, don't worry, we're going to pay for it. The U.S. workers are going to pay for it. You don't have to pay for it. Your workers don't have to pay for it. Don't worry about it. We have that under control. That's what it then enables Israel to go have the confidence to go fight and bomb other countries, is knowing that we've paid for a system that prevents their country from getting attacked back. It's totally fungible. You cannot this differentiation between, I want to pay for genocidal Israel's defensive system but not offensive. It makes no sense whatsoever. And then the other point she's basically saying is that, look, I am what I am above all else, AOC is saying, I am a humanitarian. I don't want to see any innocent people dying. And so, although I think Israel is committing genocide, it doesn't mean that I want innocent Israelis to be killed. I don't want to see any innocent people being killed. So of course I'm going to force American workers, including people in my district, to pay for Israel's defensive systems that prevent their civilians from being killed.
And they don't even always do that. We saw in the recent war with Iran that Iran got some ballistic missiles through the Iron Dome, so it does have some deficiencies, but that's, I guess, unrelated to the point. He's right. She's going to have a hard time justifying this to her most progressive allies, that some of which are actually really good when it comes to this issue with Israel. She was one of the founding members of the Squad, right? Which, has almost uniformly opposed aid to Israel and, has actually been relatively good on that issue, again, from a non-interventionist perspective. Now, if you want to aid Israel to the teeth, it's essentially no different from what the Israel First Republicans are wanting to do. And yeah, a lot of the Democratic Party and establishment is totally on board with that, but that's not something that's accepted in any way by the distant left or the progressive left.
But then that prompts the question, why doesn't, there are a lot of countries who are either in danger of getting bombed or who are getting bombed. Russia, for example, is getting bombed by Ukrainian missiles and drones. The Iranians are constantly being threatened with that and just got bombed for 12 straight days and have been bombed previously by Israel. The Gazans are being bombed. People in the West Bank are being bombed. Syria is being bombed. Lebanon is being bombed. Why isn't AOC saying we should pay for air defenses for any country that's in danger of being bombed or is being bombed to protect their civilians? Because I, AOC, am such a humanitarian that I'm even willing to pay for the air defense systems of a country that I claim is committing genocide.
Yeah, this is a great point by Glenn, too. I didn't think of this angle, but he's right. If that's your prerogative to aid the unfortunate being bombed, unjustly and immorally by neighboring powers or powers within the region, why wouldn't you aid Syria or Lebanon? It's because the Israel lobby, and the Israel lobby still has pull over these so-called progressives that want to endear themselves to the mainstream enough to possibly become president in 2029. I think that really is what's happening. And that's such a great point by Glenn I didn't think of. It's like if you expand this theorem to its maximum conclusion, it would mean, basically arming all the other powers in the Middle East other than Israel, rather than Israel.
But she doesn't want that. She doesn't advocate for that. She's never said, let's have the American worker build an air defense system for Iran to protect innocent Iranians, or Russia to protect innocent Russians, or innocent Syrians or innocent Lebanese, or even innocent Gazans. She doesn't want to arm Gaza to let it protect itself. She only invokes this super humanitarian principle for one country and one country only, and that country's name is Israel. While she pretends it's a universal principle, she only defends it for one country.
Yeah, and in that way is not unlike the fiercest Zionists in the world, that there's a special carve-out for Israel in regard to military intelligence, weaponry, etc. in the Middle East. The rest of the region be damned, and in the name of U.S. empire building, expanding U.S. hegemony in the region, and, expanding military bases in the region, building more, sending more troops over there, having bases all across the Arabian Peninsula, putting them at peril in a potential clash with Iran, which, by the way, Iran didn't even behave in any way similar to what the neocons and fiercest Israel First supporters acted. Like, they were going to just be uncaring about self-preservation, just wipe out as many people as possible, as many Israelis, as many U.S. soldiers, etc. They didn't do that because they don't want war. They've never wanted war. This whole thing's a propaganda machine. And feeding the beast, feeding Israel and Netanyahu right now, a war criminal with more money, this is not gonna go away in progressive circles in the same way that the Epstein cover-up isn't gonna go away in right-wing circles who are actually very critical of Trump for it. I think AOC is gonna get significant pushback. She already is. She's getting basically ratioed from this, I believe. And it's not just on Twitter. She's getting a lot of flack for it.
And it just so happens to be, it's a huge coincidence because we know AOC is not a scheming, conniving, principle-free, craven politician. She's a humanitarian. But it's just, I can't help but note the coincidence that if you want to get elected to statewide office in the state she's from, which is New York, like if you want to be senator of New York and replace Chuck Schumer, want to be governor of New York, it's really helpful to be able to say, oh, look, I stood up for Israel and paid for its Iron Dome and its defensive weapon system, but I didn't do that for Gaza or the West Bank or Iran or Syria or Lebanon, just for Israel. You know what? If you want to pay for Israel's defense system, don't pretend that you think it's committing a genocide, because sending a country committing genocide $500 million is one of the most insultingly deceitful things I ever heard a politician say.
Yeah, man, I'm with Glenn totally. He makes a great point, and he had particular fire in this whole video. I think he was a firebrand here, and he's right about AOC. If you give aid to any country you think is committing a genocide, what does that say? What does that, broadcast to not only your political supporters, but the rest of the world, that you're willing to just turn a blind eye to that part of it in order to fund other parts of it? It'd be like, hey, Hitler's committing a genocide, which he was. That was the Holocaust. But, we're going to send him all this money for, defensive missile purposes. Let's just do that because we don't want more innocent losses of life there. It wouldn't make sense. Obviously, this wouldn't fly. This whole mentality is stupid, and she's going to pay for it on the left, not on the right, who already hates her guts already, right? And the establishment right and the populist right both doesn't like AOC in many ways. She actually has been decent on aid to Israel up until this point in some facets, but this is, I think, the ultimate signal. She's going to run for president. You can't be an acceptable regime-filtered option for president, regardless of Democratic Party or Republican Party, if you don't bend the knee to some extent to Israel. And I think that that's the big thing at work here. And this will be more and more confirmed the amount of time that goes by, and we see if she continues to support Israel and, maybe even progressively ramp up the support to Israel. It really will, I think, validate that assertion. And hey, bookmark this video, come back in a few years and, let me have it. Make me eat crow if I'm not right. But I think she does want to run for president. There's other factors, too, that lead me to that outside of this issue. I believe it was confirmed that last year she removed her pronouns from her bio on Twitter at some point, and that, coincidentally happened when wokeness was becoming the least popular it ever had been, and things like including genders, pronouns in your bio and things like that. It speaks to me that she's doing politically palpable maneuvers to position herself in a way that she wouldn't just be completely rejected by the establishment Democratic Party. Like, the Democratic establishment could be very accepting of her. And it already somewhat was, but there are certain things that you just cannot do if you want to get into that realm of possibilities to be considered for the U.S. presidency. And bending the knee to Israel is one of those things that you absolutely have to do to be considered for that option. And that's true with the Republican Party, too. I hate to say it. AIPAC has so much pull over this government that it's almost like they can control everything. We saw it this week with this aid package. We saw that they had only 6 votes against, or 6 votes supporting Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment. So very few people, regardless of left, right, Democrat, or Republican, oppose this thing. So that's where we're at. That's where AOC is. It'll be interesting to see how the squad responds to this, if Tlaib or Ilhan Omar says anything about it. I can't wait to hear about that, but I think Glenn is absolutely on target here. You wouldn't be funding in any way a power militarily that you believe is committing genocide, and we shouldn't. The U.S. shouldn't do that. AOC's right to put that part in writing, but when you just say that and don't follow what your best sentiments are, your most true sentiments are, you're no different than the charlatans of the right that talked about how, hey, we're not going to arm Ukraine. They did that. We're not going to launch a new war. They helped Israel do that in Iran, and we're going to be transparent on the Epstein story. They weren't. They're covering it up. And, hey, we're going to actually slash government spending. We're going to make all these cuts, $2 trillion in Doge cuts. They didn't do that. Instead, they boasted about a $150 billion additional higher Pentagon budget that went over $1 trillion for the first time. So that's where we're at. Let me know in the comments below. Do you agree with me? Do you think AOC is going to run for president? Do you agree with Glenn? Is there any justification, if you are an opponent of Israeli aid, to do and behave as AOC has in this circumstance? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to Glenn too. He's awesome. Love that he covered this issue, and his sensibilities are, in my estimation, pretty great here. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. Click the join button below. You'll help support the channel and get access to all my videos before they go live on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.